The corporate lobby was blindingly bright. VIP guests streamed in for the signing event of the decade. Near the entrance, a janitor silently mopped a scuff mark. He had rolled up his sleeves, revealing a faded, jagged tattoo on his inner wrist. A young, arrogant manager noticed it and laughed. "You're just a janitor, buddy. Cover that up. We don't need prison ink scaring the investors." Employees snickered. The janitor didn't react. He just kept working. 10 minutes later, a retired four-star general walked in, froze in the middle of a handshake, and stared at that tattoo in absolute trembling shock. His name was Michael Reyes. 48 years old, with salt and pepper hair cut short in a style he hadn't changed in 3 decades, a straight back that refused to slump under the weight of his reality, and hands that were roughened by years of honest, hard, unforgiving labor. He was a single father. His entire world, his reason for waking up before dawn every single morning to scrub floors, was his 12-year-old son, Leo. At this exact moment, Leo was sitting in the fluorescent-lit public library 3 blocks away, finishing his history homework at a scratched wooden table, waiting patiently for his dad's shift to end. Michael hated making him wait. He hated that Leo knew the librarians by name better than his own neighbors. But the overtime pay this month wasn't just extra money, it was survival. Leo needed braces, a cost that kept Michael up at night, staring at the ceiling, and the rent on their small, drafty 2-bedroom apartment had just gone up by $200. He had skipped lunch for the last 3 weeks to save enough for Leo's upcoming field trip. Michael wasn't an executive. He wasn't a coder writing algorithms. He wasn't a shareholder waiting for dividends. He was a contract janitor at Omnicorp, one of the largest, most profitable defense technology firms in the country. His job was invisible. He emptied the heavy shredder bins that held secrets he never read. He polished the massive glass conference tables where deals worth billions were signed by men who never looked him in the eye. He replaced the toner in the copiers that printed contracts longer than a novel. He was the ghost in the machine, essential yet entirely overlooked. The cartilage in his left knee grinded bone on bone with every step, a constant sharp reminder of a mortar blast in 2009. But he didn't limp. Limping showed weakness, and Michael Reyes did not show weakness. Nobody at Omnicorp knew much about him. He was just Mike, or the guy, or simply janitor. He spoke very little. He kept his head down. He was never late, and he never complained, even when the work was grueling, even when his old knee injury throbbed with a dull, aching fire after 8 hours on concrete. But Michael hadn't always pushed a heavy industrial mop bucket. On his right wrist, usually hidden beneath the long, buttoned sleeves of his gray uniform, was a tattoo. It wasn't a piece of trendy flash art picked off a wall. It was a small, faded black insignia of a shield and a lightning bolt. It was the unit patch of the 101st Airborne Infantry, the Screaming Eagles. Michael had served 14 years. He wasn't a movie hero played by a Hollywood star. He wasn't a Navy SEAL who wrote a best-selling book about his workouts. He was an infantryman, a grunt. He had marched through freezing mud, slept in the pouring rain, and stood guard in terrifyingly silent valleys that most people couldn't find on a map. He had done his duty quietly and honorably until a severe, career-ending knee injury during a live-fire training exercise ended his service with a medical discharge. He didn't carry a high rank. He didn't have a chest full of medals for singular acts of cinematic valor. He just had the quiet, bone-deep discipline of a man who had served his country, buried his friends, and returned home to face a different kind of battle. Raising a son alone after his wife left them, because she couldn't handle the silence that came home with him. She had wanted a husband who talked about his day. Michael had come back a man who scanned the perimeter of the grocery store. Today, the Omnicorp headquarters was buzzing with frantic, high-stakes energy. The company was hosting a massive gala to celebrate a new, multi-billion-dollar partnership with a national defense fund. The guest list was a who's who of the military-industrial complex. Retired generals, active duty officers, senators, and lobbyists were all converging on the lobby. Michael had been assigned to the front-of-house duty. It was the worst assignment. It meant he had to be visible, cleaning up spills instantly as the VIPs walked by, practically invisible, yet constantly in the way. It meant being treated like a piece of moving furniture. He checked his cheap digital watch. 3 more hours. Just 3 more hours, and he could go pick up Leo, get some pepperoni pizza, and maybe watch a baseball game. That simple thought kept him going. He dipped the mop into the bucket, wringing it out with practiced rhythmic efficiency. The air conditioning in the lobby was struggling against the heat of the crowd and the glare of the afternoon sun through the glass facade. Michael wiped sweat from his forehead. Without thinking, feeling the heat rise, he rolled the sleeves of his uniform up to his elbows to cool down. The tattoo on his wrist was now exposed. It was a small detail, a mark of ink on skin, but in a room full of people pretending to be important, wearing lapel pins they bought online, it was the only thing in that lobby that was undeniably, brutally real. The atmosphere in the lobby shifted as the junior executives began to swarm like sharks, desperate to impress the incoming VIPs. Among them was Dylan Carter. Dylan was 32 years old, a mid-level project manager who wore suits that were slightly too tight and drove a leased sports car he couldn't actually afford. He was the kind of man who measured his self-worth by how many people he could order around. He was stressed, ambitious, and deeply insecure, constantly looking for someone below him to kick to feel taller. He had seen the VP of marketing watching from the mezzanine, and he wanted to look authoritative. He spotted Michael near the main entrance, carefully mopping a small coffee spill left by a nervous intern. Dylan marched over, his polished shoes clicking aggressively on the marble floor. He checked his phone, straightened his tie, then looked at Michael with unmasked disdain. "Hey, you!" Dylan snapped, snapping his fingers loudly. "Move it! We have the delegation arriving in 2 minutes. I don't want a wet floor sign in the middle of the press photos. Get that ugly yellow thing out of the frame." Michael stopped mopping. He stood up straight, towering over Dylan by 2 inches, though he kept his posture non-threatening, his hands resting on the mop handle. "I'm just clearing the spill, sir. It's a safety hazard. If someone slips—" "I don't care about safety hazards," Dylan hissed, looking around to see if anyone was watching him exert authority. "I care about optics. Move to the side. Now. You look like a stain on the scenery. Go stand behind the pillar." Michael nodded slowly, swallowing the retort that rose in his throat. "Understood." He picked up the heavy yellow bucket and moved toward the wall, trying to blend into the architectural shadows. As he moved, he lifted his arm to wipe his brow again. Dylan's eyes caught the movement. He saw the black ink on Michael's wrist, the shield and the lightning bolt. It stood out starkly against his tan skin. Dylan let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cruel, performative sound meant to draw attention. "Whoa, what is that?" Dylan asked loudly, pointing a finger at Michael's wrist. Michael paused. He looked down at his arm, then back at Dylan. "It's a tattoo, sir." "I can see it's a tattoo," Dylan sneered, his voice carrying over the low hum of the lobby. "I mean, really? You're wearing that here? It looks like prison ink. Did you get that in a basement?" A few other junior employees stopped to watch, sensing drama. They smirked, following Dylan's lead, eager to be on the side of the bully. "It's from my service," Michael said quietly, his voice calm, steady, and devoid of shame. Dylan rolled his eyes dramatically, playing to his audience. "Oh, please, give me a break. Let me guess. You watched Black Hawk Down one too many times and got a sticker at a mall kiosk? Or were you in the reserves for a weekend and washed out because it rained?" "I served 14 years, sir," Michael replied, his jaw tightening just slightly, his knuckles turning white on the mop handle. He focused on a spot on the wall, employing the same discipline that had kept him calm under mortar fire. Dylan stepped closer, invading Michael's personal space, smelling of mints and arrogance. 14 years? And now you're mopping floors? If you were actually any good, if you actually had any skills, you'd be working security or logistics. You wouldn't be a janitor. The insult hung in the air. It was ugly. It was unnecessary. It stripped away the dignity of labor. "I do my job, sir," Michael said, his eyes hard, staring straight ahead. "You're just a janitor," Dylan laughed, shaking his head as if pitying him. "Cover that thing up. It looks unprofessional. You're embarrassing the company." We have real military men coming in here today. Generals, heroes, men who actually accomplished something with their lives. They don't need to see some washout trying to steal valor with a blurry tattoo. Michael felt a flash of heat in his chest, a familiar, dangerous heat. The old instinct, the one trained into him at Fort Benning, the one sharpened in the mountains of Afghanistan, flared up. He assessed Dylan in less than a second. Soft hands, poor balance, exposed neck. He could have dropped Dylan in 2 seconds before the man even realized he was falling. He could have explained exactly what that tattoo meant and the names of the friends he had lost while wearing that patch. Friends who died screaming so men like Dylan could wear nice suits and complain about their lattes. But he thought of Leo. Leo waiting at the library. Leo needing braces. Leo needing a father, not a felon. If he caused a scene, he would be fired. If he was fired, they lost the apartment. If they lost the apartment, they lost everything. The war at home was harder than the war overseas because here, he couldn't fight back. So Michael swallowed the pride. He swallowed the anger. He buried the soldier deep inside. "Yes, sir," Michael said softly. He slowly unrolled his sleeves, buttoning the cuffs with deliberate care, hiding the mark of his service. "Good," Dylan smirked, adjusting his tie, feeling powerful. "Now stay out of the way. The adults are talking." Dylan turned back to his colleagues, laughing. "Can you believe that guy? Probably peeled potatoes for a decade and thinks he's a hero. It's pathetic." The group laughed. Michael stood by the wall, gripping the handle of his mop until his knuckles turned white. He didn't say a word. He just watched the door. He wasn't waiting for an apology. He knew men like Dylan never apologized. He was just doing his job. But the universe has a funny, poetic way of balancing the scales. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, admitting a gust of warm air, and the flashing lights of press cameras outside. A hush fell over the lobby. The CEO of Omnicorp, a tall, imposing woman named Sarah Jenkins, stepped forward with a beaming smile. Beside her walked the guest of honor. It was General Samuel Grant, retired. He was a legend, a man whose face had been on the cover of Time magazine. He walked with a heavy cane now, favoring his left leg, his movements slightly slower than in his prime, but his eyes were still as sharp as eagles. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but everyone knew that underneath it was a warrior who had shaped modern military strategy. He carried an aura of command that sucked the oxygen out of the room. He didn't just walk, he occupied space. Dylan Carter practically vibrated with excitement. This was his moment. He puffed out his chest, preparing to shake the general's hand as part of the welcoming committee. He had rehearsed his line in the mirror. He imagined the photo op that would land him a promotion. General Grant shook hands with the CEO. He nodded politely to the line of executives. He moved through the lobby, his eyes scanning the room. A habit of an old soldier who always checked his perimeter, always looked for the exits, always looked for the threats. He looked bored by the pageantry, his gaze drifting over the expensive suits and forced smiles. He was heading toward the elevators. Dylan stepped forward, ready with his rehearsed greeting, his hand extended, a wide plastic smile plastered on his face. "General Grant, it is an absolute honor to—" But the general didn't stop at Dylan. He didn't even look at Dylan. He walked right past him as if Dylan were a potted plant. General Grant stopped dead in his tracks. He was looking past the line of expensive suits. He was looking past the security detail. He was looking at the wall. He was looking at Michael. Michael was standing at attention. It wasn't intentional. It was muscle memory. When a general walks into a room, you stand straight. Your heels lock. Your chin lifts. Michael was holding his mop like a rifle, his back rigid, his eyes forward. General Grant squinted. He took a step away from the CEO. He changed direction, limping slightly toward the janitor. The entire lobby went silent. The CEO looked confused. Dylan looked bewildered, his hands still extended in the air, holding nothing. The general stopped 3 feet from Michael. He looked at Michael's face, searching his memory, scanning the lines around Michael's eyes. Then his eyes dropped to Michael's wrist. The sleeve had slipped up slightly when Michael gripped the mop tight in his anger. Just an inch, but it was enough. The bottom edge of the lightning bolt was visible against the gray fabric. Soldier? The general's voice was gravelly and loud in the silent room. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Michael blinked. Sir. General Grant pointed with his cane at Michael's wrist. Let me see it. Michael hesitated. He looked at Dylan, who was staring with his mouth open. Then slowly, Michael unbuttoned his cuff and rolled up the sleeve. The faded shield and lightning bolt were revealed. The ink was old, slightly blurred by time and sun, but unmistakable. General Grant stared at it for a long, heavy moment. He reached out and touched his own wrist, as if remembering a phantom pain. Then a slow, warm smile spread across his weathered face. He looked up at Michael. The 101st, Grant said softly. 2nd Battalion? The No-Slack Battalion? Yes, sir, Michael replied, his voice cracking slightly. Bravo Company, 2004 to 2018. The general nodded slowly, a shadow passing over his eyes. For a split second, the marble lobby faded away for Grant. He wasn't seeing a janitor. He was seeing the dust of the Korangal Valley, the smell of burning diesel, and the faces of young men who held impossible lines against overwhelming odds. He remembered the radio chatter that winter, the desperate calls for support that couldn't come due to the weather, and the sergeant who kept his squad alive through sheer force of will. That sergeant was standing right here, holding a mop. Bravo Company, you boys held the line in the Korangal Valley when no one else could. That was a hard winter, son. I remember the reports. We thought we lost the whole platoon at Restrepo. We did our best, sir. Your best? The general laughed, a warm, genuine sound that echoed off the marble. I read the after-action reports from that winter. What you did wasn't just your best. It was impossible. You held that outpost with duct tape and grit when air support couldn't fly. Dylan Carter stood frozen. His brain couldn't process what was happening. The janitor was talking to the general about a valley he had never heard of, sharing a language he didn't speak. What is your name, son? General Grant asked. Michael Reyes, sir. The general's eyes widened slightly. Reyes? Sergeant Michael Reyes? Yes, sir. Retired. The general turned around slowly. He looked at the CEO. He looked at the executives. He looked at Dylan, who seemed to shrink under the gaze. Does anyone here know who this man is? General Grant asked, his voice booming like artillery. Silence. I didn't think so, Grant said, shaking his head. He turned back to Michael. I was the colonel in command of the brigade back then. I signed your discharge papers, Reyes. I remember your file. You pulled 3 men out of a burning transport vehicle on a knee that was already shattered. You carried them 2 miles under fire. Michael looked down at the floor. Anyone would have done it, sir. No, Grant said firmly. They wouldn't. Most men would have run. You stayed. You always stayed. The general extended his hand, not a polite corporate handshake, a warrior's handshake. It is an honor to meet you again, Sergeant Reyes. Michael took the general's hand. He gripped it firmly. The honor is mine, General. Dylan Carter felt the blood drain from his face. He felt sick. He had just told a man who pulled people out of burning tanks that he was just a janitor and accused him of stealing valor. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The general leaned in close to Michael. What are you doing pushing a mop, Reyes? A man with your logistics experience? A man with your leadership record? It works for my son, sir, Michael said honestly. I'm a single dad. Leo. He needs me around. The hours let me be there for him. I can't travel anymore. I can't leave him alone. The general nodded, understanding perfectly. Still protecting your own. Good man. The dynamic in the room had shattered. The hierarchy was broken. The expensive suit suddenly looked cheap compared to the gray uniform. The polished marble floor felt less significant than the scuffed boots Michael wore. The CEO, Sarah Jenkins, stepped forward. She was a smart woman. She realized immediately that she had a massive blind spot in her organization. She realized she had a diamond hidden in the rough and that her team had been stepping on it. Sergeant Reyes, she said, her voice respectful, stripped of her usual corporate detachment. I had no idea. We've employed you for 2 years? I don't talk about it much, ma'am, Michael said, rolling his sleeve back down. I just came to work. The floor needed cleaning, and I needed the paycheck. General Grant turned to Dylan. He had seen the interaction earlier. He had seen the way Dylan sneered. He had old eyes, but he didn't miss much. "Young man," Grant said to Dylan. Dylan jumped. Yes, General?" "You told him to cover that tattoo up, didn't you?" Dylan stammered, sweating profusely. I just thought, for professional standards, strict dress code, I didn't know." "Professional standards," Grant repeated, tasting the words like sour milk. "Let me tell you something about standards. That tattoo is the only reason you are standing in a free country running your little projects. That tattoo is a receipt paid for in blood and cartilage. It is the highest standard there is." Grant stepped closer to Dylan, leaning on his cane. "You judged a book by its cover, and you missed the entire story. This man isn't just anything. He is a part of history. You would do well to remember that titles are given, but respect is earned. And right now you have none of mine." Dylan looked at the floor, humiliated, wishing the marble would open up and swallow him whole. "Yes, sir. I apologize. I messed up." Grant turned back to Michael. "Reyes, are you happy here? I can make a call. I know people." Michael looked at the CEO, then at the mop. "I'm grateful for the work, sir. It feeds my boy. That's all that matters to me." The CEO spoke up, her mind racing. "Michael, we have a vacancy in our Operations Security Division. It's a desk role. Shifts are 8 to 4. We need someone who understands perimeter defense and risk assessment. We need someone who can spot a threat before it happens. I was going to hire an outside consultant, but I think you're overqualified. Would you be interested?" Michael paused. Operations Security. That was his field. Better pay. No heavy lifting on the bad knee. And 8 to 4 meant he could still pick up Leo from school every day. It meant he could afford the braces. It meant he could maybe move them to a safer neighborhood. "I don't have a degree, ma'am," Michael said. "You have 14 years of field experience and a commendation from General Grant," the CEO smiled. "That counts as a PhD in my book. We can discuss the salary tomorrow. It will be substantial." Later that evening, the event was winding down. The champagne flutes were empty. The guests were leaving. Dylan Carter found Michael near the back exit. Michael was changing out of his uniform, putting on his civilian jacket. The locker room smelled of sweat and bleach. Dylan didn't have his usual swagger. He looked small, defeated. "Michael," Dylan said. He didn't use "hey you" this time. Michael turned. "Mr. Carter, I was out of line," Dylan said, struggling with the words. "I shouldn't have said what I said. About the janitor thing, or the tattoo. I didn't know who you were." Michael looked at him. He could have rubbed it in. He could have been smug. He could have reported him to HR and ended his career right there. "We all have bad days," Michael said simply. "Just don't do it to the next guy. You never know who you're talking to. The guy emptying your trash might have saved a life, or he might just be a good man trying to feed his kid. Either way, he deserves respect." "I won't," Dylan promised. "Congratulations on the promotion." "Thanks." Michael walked out the back door into the cool evening air. He walked 3 blocks to the library. The street lights were humming. He felt lighter. The pain in his knee was still there, but the weight on his shoulders was gone. Leo was waiting on the steps, holding his heavy backpack, kicking a stone. He looked up as Michael approached, his young eyes widening slightly. He noticed something different about his father's posture, a straightness, a renewed confidence that had been buried under years of exhaustion. "Hey, Dad," Leo yelled, running down. "You're late. Did you have to clean a giant mess?" "Sorry, kiddo," Michael smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Had a meeting with the boss." "A meeting? You?" Leo laughed. "Did you get in trouble?" "No," Michael said, looking at his wrist, tracing the outline of the tattoo under his jacket. "Actually, I think I finally got some respect. And we're getting pizza, extra pepperoni, and maybe we can look at that new apartment complex near the park this weekend." They walked toward the bus stop. Michael wasn't walking like a janitor anymore. He wasn't walking like a tired single dad worried about rent. He was walking like Sergeant Reyes. The tattoo hadn't changed. The man hadn't changed. but the world around him had finally opened its eyes. If you believe that a person's past deserves respect regardless of their current job title, hit that subscribe button to follow more stories of hidden heroes. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been judged or dismissed because of your appearance, only to prove everyone wrong?